This is
still
the
go
longest
down.
thing we've ever done. This is longer than the 2 hour game.
I can still go down 2 vertices on the
and end at 1.
And end at 1.
If you wanted to end at half, you'd have to go down 2.5 vertices.
So, but to me, I go that's where I go. If I can't.
Again, you don't vote. You seem to not rate things as halves because they would throw off your system.
Yeah. That may be
true. That's
true.
where I'm going. I agree that if I didn't have half-star options, I would have to use something like you're using. But because I have that option, because again, we're talking abstractly about mathematics, I don't see why we wouldn't use that.
Sure.
This has been...
But the point is
this going to have to be broken into 2, or am I just going to...
No.
Is this just... Well, I guess I can't, because this won't make sense if it's not all at once.
The ending of my argument is...
You are starting spatially.
I would concede that, again, in large part, yours makes more sense universally. However, I would also argue that most, if not all, barring the one exception of the half a star that you get on Goodreads, the 5-star system is represented in integers. There's no way of doing it any other way. You either don't rate the film, which
that's not
in
true,
some ways is actually better.
Because IMDb does decimals.
Does what? Half
they don't
stars?
they don't even do stars. They just do out of 10. So it's like a 6 out of 10, or they do like 6.2 out of 10. Because technically because this is the other reason why this occurs, is that, like, take for example, Goodreads only allows people to rate in full integers. But if you look at the average rating of a Goodreads book, it will be a decimal point, because if you rate a book a 2, and I rated a 3, the average rating is a 2.5. Because one person rated it once, or rated it a 2, one person rated it a 3. If another person rated it a 3, it would be 2.6. Because you'd be taking the average, you'd be saying, okay, how many people voted what way, and how many people voted in total? So
right, I understand.
You would be 1/3 of the people rated it a 2. 2/3 of the people rated it a 3. So it's going to be closer to 3 than it is to 2. My point is, this is how rating, even if you only allowed integers, when you aggregate them, they're going to become decimals, because unless everybody votes one integer, they're gonna be fractionated, because they have to be. But even if the people voting are only voting in whole numbers.
The balance of how I understand, and again, part of it is how I'm processing the way I consider a film.
I don't disagree with that.
This is what the crux comes down to.
But you then, in order to convey your opinion,
it doesn't allow me then to place that on a precise scale. That's the problem.
It does. You have to then use your own scale, which means when you tell someone your opinion, you have to explain them your opinion.
But again,
you have to give them the stick and say it's 3 sticks.
Or again, when I go, the scale itself, if you're using decimals and you put 2.5 of anything on one side of the scale and 2.5 on the other, the scale itself is the point in the middle that's balancing.
Yeah, but see, that's what I think is you're getting hung up on again, is the physical thing. 2.5 what is what you want to know.
No, it's not about 2.5 what. It's about the fact that I have then room to go, this is exactly average. This film literally made me feel nothing.
And some films
do that. On the positive or negative.
Some films do that.
But what I'm saying is, to say it's 2.5 tells me it's only 2.5.
Out of 5. That's the unspoken thing. You have to concede that we're not saying it because we're speaking quickly, but implicit in every time we say this many stars is this many out of this.
Sure. But then, again, it doesn't leave me the ability to... If you don't have 2.5 on the opposite end, it's not balanced.
But you do. I just showed you the image of 2.5 stars. 2.5 are filled in, 2.5 are not.
But the point is, the midpoint is somewhere in between those two.
No, they share one. That's what I'm getting at.
This
is why your geometric argument throws me off.
That point would be then the balance.
Well, okay, but sure. Again, I only started with 0. So if I started the way I'm thinking of it, where I start at 0, go to 5, I'm going to have to, mathematically speaking, this would be the halfway point between those things. If that's 2.5, then you've got...
See, this is where you... Well, because 2.5 is not the center.
It is.
It's not. How do you add 2.5 more when this is the same space?
Because they're sharing this. This is what I think you're thrown off by, is you think all of this is this. This is a valid geometric shape. They can share a vertices, and it is one vertices.
That's a problem.
So 2.5 can equally go this way and this way at the same time. You want them, you feel like they need to be split for some reason. They don't have to be. I can just draw another triangle. Now these triangles aren't going to line up very well because this is now going to be 1.25 and this will be 3.75. That's a weird, but again, it doesn't matter that they're triangles. What matters is this, they can share this vertices. If I say 2.5 here and 2.5 here, there's no space between them. They line up exactly. That's what I think. That's why your geometric argument throws me off.
But it doesn't. The only way to balance it is by putting 2.5 on either side.
Yes, which I've just done. There's 2.5 here and there's 2.5 there. 5 minus 2.5 is 2.5. 2.5 minus 2.5 is 0.
Right.
But here's what I think you're thrown off by is if I say
2 minus.
If I go 0, 1, 2.5, I can't do that with my fingers. You seem to want to do it with your fingers. 5 minus 2
is 3.
And 3 minus 2 is 1.
So you're able then to actually plot that, is my point.
Yes, because you can't go below 1.
Okay, great.
Which means your system is 4 points. Because you go from 1 to 2 is 1, 2 to 3 is 1, 3 to 4 is 1, 4 to 5 is 1. That's 4 jumps, 4 ups from 1. 1 plus 4 is 5.
It's 2 ups. Yes, but see, I don't. That's the problem.
But that's so you're saying it jumps by 4.
Start at 1. That is the problem.
But see, it does.
That's it doesn't climb from. My point is, it doesn't climb from 1. It starts at 3. The way I think about
that's what I think is weird.
I start it in the center and I go, okay,
because the film, if a film,
does this air on the positive side or the negative side?
When a film gets made, it is not average by default.
Yes, it is.
No, not necessarily. A film, by being made,
things by the average. You
approach them by their absence. If this film was never made, it would be a 0. The fact that it's made means it can't be a 0. It must be something. The fact that you can't just say, I'm going to make a film,
right,
and then it's an average 2.5 film.
And you go, most films are going to sit at 3, so...
No. See, that's a presumption you're making. The average film is a 3. Like that, you're starting with that assumption.
There's 2 more.
Yes, you have the ability, but you have to acknowledge that you are starting from a artificial or arbitrary assumption that an average film is 3. You're starting from that point and arguing why it makes sense. And to a degree, it does make sense. But you are starting from that point. You're not arriving at that point by math. You are using math to justify that point. I am saying, mathematically speaking, I'm starting with the math and finding the answer within the numbers. Because you want to say the average film is 3. And therefore, I can add or I can subtract, and it's all about nuance.
But for me, it's not a nuance thing; it's a balance thing. There's 2.
Well, that's what I mean by nuance, as in you can go up or down as the film deserves. That's what I mean by nuance.
But my point is, it's balance. I still don't concede that on a mathematical level it's erroneous because it is the midpoint.
It's the midpoint between 1 and 5.
Because of the fact that I can actually 0 can still be represented because I can subtract 2.
No, 3 minus 2 is 1.
My point is, if I'm using 3, then I can go down to a 2 and a 1 or nothing. Or I can go up to a 4 or a 5.
Or a 6. You would have to.
No.
Yes, because if you want to go from 3 to 0, you have to subtract 3.
And that would then require that I don't rate the film.
You would no, because you said I could get to 0 by just subtracting 3. So 3 minus 3 is 0. But that's no longer the midpoint.
3, so I'm subtracting 2.
And you end up with 1.
No, what I'm saying is I'm moving down from 3. And I'm
3,
going
2, 1,
none.
No, 3, 2, 1. Here's this is
2, 1, none.
No,
I've moved twice.
Moved, yes, but this is where I'm saying, mathematically speaking, you're saying here's 3. This is 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3. You've made 2 jumps, but there are 3 points. This is my point with the finger thing.
No, because I'm
already
on
5 fingers,
1 point.
There's 4 spaces between them.
I'm already on 1 point.
Yes, so it's saying this is 3. You jump, so you make 1,
2.
1
take
jump.
These 2 down.
1 jump, 2 jumps. Yes, 3 minus 2 though is 1.
I don't disagree with that, but my point is, if you are starting at 3,
but see, the thing is, you're acting as though 3 doesn't exist. Like you're taking 3 for granted. That's arbitrary. You are deciding from the outset that 3 is the thing you take for granted. This is why the bingo comparison. You're saying this is the free space. Every film gets this.
Yes.
And that's where I go, that is an arbitrary decision. Yes, you can justify it mathematically, but you're not arriving at it based on mathematical sense. You're using mathematical sense to decide upon it after you've agreed.
I still think
you basically say it can make sense because I'm arguing for it. And it's can,
not solely because I'm
but you are
arguing for
deciding it first. You're saying this is my starting point, and then I will use math after that.
It's about.
I'm saying I start with math.
It's the fact that I'm moving down to or up to,
which precludes the option of a half-star film. Because if it does, then in order to be equal, there must be a 5.5-star film. You have to acknowledge that this is my point, is you are staying within the integer system, but you're trying to claim that you're not. Because again, I am coming at this from pure mathematics.
Well, but what I'm saying
You're coming at it from this is my starting point, and then I use math. I'm saying math is the starting point.
What I'm saying is 2.5 and 5 can be split. Yes, it can be split directly in half by 2.5, but that point can then be split into further splits and into further splits.
But see, all
that's
numbers
what
could
Adam
be
Savage was talking about with the infinite. Like,
but that's only a thing in physical measuring, because the number 2.5 does exist.
I'm not arguing the point that on a geometric level.
You're thinking that well, technically speaking, this isn't 2.5; it's 2.49999. If you had a really great ruler that was so precise, you could say this isn't 2.5; it's actually 2.49871.
Would you not agree, though?
No, you have to acknowledge
exactly 2.5, and there's another exact 2.5 on the other side.
There isn't. That's
there would be.
This is what's weird. You insist that we split them in half.
Yes.
Which is dumb, because you don't have to.
Is.
But you don't have to.
That's what half is.
No, you're saying let's take the stick and break it in half. I'm saying forget the stick. It's 2.5 out of 5.
It's a median.
Okay, again, my argument is you could measure a building with some old stick you pick up and say this building is 46 sticks tall. And you are absolutely correct. And no one will know what you mean unless you give them that stick.
That's true.
And therefore,
I've already conceded that part.
But see, therefore, as long as we acknowledge that you're saying this is my system, and you're allowed to have a system. But my point is, no one will take you very seriously if you say to them, this building is this many sticks. Because they're going to go, what the heck does that mean? Whereas if I say to someone, it's 2.5 out of 5, it could be anything. That's why dimensionless numbers are very useful. Because I don't need the stick anymore. It's 2.5 out of 5 of anything.
But if you use that exact same argument, mine at least has a very clear and distinct, it's this many sticks.
Well, yes, okay, I agree, but then that means nothing to anyone but
this 2 out of 5.
But that means
for that building.
Well, but exactly.
Because again, if you're using space, it doesn't make sense. But see,
this is the point, though, is that I'm not suggesting that your argument doesn't. You're allowed to have your stick.
I'm not saying that.
But a film is not geometric. This is what throws me.
Okay, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, you just put it in that term,
because
and you can't say you're insisting. 5 building is anything.
Exactly, because I'm not measuring the height of a building. I'm not measuring the subjective quality of an abstract concept.
Right.
I don't need a stick to do that. You're insisting on the stick. And it's like, yes, you can work the stick into this system, but there's no need for the stick. That's why I'm having to use this example, because you're insisting on it.
Because I appreciate geometric spatial relationship, yes. I appreciate being able to look at something and go, there's a balance here on one side and the other. I don't appreciate having to go, okay, so if, again, there's 2.5 on one side and then 2.5 on the other, but see, there has to be something in the middle.
That's where I still maintain, geometrically speaking, you're inaccurate, because there is look up the kind of co-vertices or co-terminal shape. Because you're suggesting there must be something between them, but no, it's a vertices.
That vertices is the center. And that is the balance point.
And
there's 2 equilateral triangles that are equal to one another on either side.
And they both share that point. That point is not split between them. They share it.
So it therefore can't be used. I'm not disagreeing that I can't use 3. I don't.
But see, that's why I'm saying now you're taking your limited range and saying now one of these numbers I can't even use. It's like
I use it as a starting point.
Which may as well be nothing. Then you may as well just rate it 0 then at that point, because you're almost acting as though it's not rated. Like it's nothing. It starts at 3, therefore 3 is nothing. In the same way that it starts at 0, therefore 0 is nothing.
Throwaway. Yes, 3 to me is
Which means that you could say...
If I say a 3, like a film is a 3, I just go, it's not really worth seeing, but it's the film.
That's what I would disagree, is a bad film is not worth seeing. An okay film is like, it's entertainment. It'll kill an hour. But that's not... This is why...
I find an average film is something that has not made me feel anything, one side or the other.
Yeah, but... That's no different than spending 2 hours online. Have you wasted that time? Yeah, kind of. Was it at least something to do if you were bored? Sure. Whereas there are a film that's a 2.5 for me, which is your 3, is like, you're thinking of that as like the lowest a film can be almost, and I'm like, that's bizarre.
2.5 to me is like, okay, it's starting to err on the side of negative. Like there's something that's stupid about it.
See, that only slow moving. But see, that only qualifies as, again, you're arguing based on your preliminary assumption being that it's 3. You have to acknowledge that comes from nowhere but your mind. There are reasons
from the fact that it is on an integer level. It is.
You are applying that after the fact. I'd like you to at least acknowledge that.
I'm applying the fact that midpoint is what I have started from.
Yes, you're starting from a midpoint, and you're basically deciding no matter what the scale is, I'm starting from a midpoint.
I'm starting from the midpoint of any scale. Yes.
No, you're starting from the midpoint of 1 to 5. If it was a different scale, you'd have to pick a different number.
It would be the midpoint.
Exactly, but that's my point is, your system does not work without the scale being defined. Mine does.
Without the scale being defined.
Because you're saying mine is always the midpoint. So what if it was a 20-star system? What's your number then?
Then it would be literally in between the 10 and the 10.
Exactly, but my point is, you're basing your midpoint off of this thing. Mine does not require a thing.
Mine requires odd numbers. That's certainly true.
Yours requires some nebulous abstract thing to be then midpoint of. So if I say, well, out of 30, what is it? Well, technically I have to pick this weird number that's in between.
That's in between.
It's
15.
like, well, okay, yeah, sure, you can do that, but the only reason you're doing that is because you must first define your scale. I don't have to define my scale. My scale is a fraction. It has no units. You're saying it's the midpoint of the unit, whatever your unit is.
Sure.
Mine does not require that.
Because,
and I find that to be far more easy.
Level, and that may be true. It is easier, but visually, mine is something that makes more sense when you look at it. If I go...
I wouldn't necessarily agree, because I still think you're kind of confused about the concept of two shapes being able to share vertices.
No, I'm not
and having them still be equal on both sides.
It will sit on the point in the middle.
Well, yes, but you're acting as though the 2.5 are fully on either side and the midpoint doesn't count. But no, both 2.5s touch this midpoint. They aren't next to it. This isn't dividing them. It is them.
Then you can't use 2.5 as your actual...
Well, I agree. By your metric, if I was basing it off of your system, but I'm not on purpose, because I think excluding one of the numbers of the rating system is kind of fruitless. Because now I can't use one of the numbers I'm choosing to use. Why would I rate it at all if I'm going to remove one of the numbers? This is now going to be the longest video we've ever done. And half of it has been this screen. So everyone can blame you. This is one of these instances where I wish there was more of an audience to respond, because I think you'd have a wake-up call. I think everyone would be like, yeah, it makes sense, but why is that your system? Again, you could go to the architect and say, this is the stick you're going to use to measure the building. I wrote it down. See, this is my scale. And they would do it, and they could make the building. And the whole time they'd be like, why can't he just use regular numbers?
Because abstract numbers does not work for measurement. So, fine,
but again,
it's metrology, but that's still a problem.
My example has to be about a physical thing, because you're choosing a physical measurement
because
system.
It's represented by a physical line. It's linear in that it's...
But see, this is what's
I'm not
weird.
Incorrect.
This is what's weird. No, this is what's weird, is that you're trying to say, you're measuring the line. I'm measuring the film.
Yes, but what I'm saying is I'm using the line as a representation of where the film sits on it. Your line is where your stick is. Yes. Which means you're now saying... But it's given to me. I'm not the one providing the stick. You're acting like I'm some doofus walking around with a stick. This has been a line that's provided for you. Here it is. Tell us where it sits on this.
Yes, but that means you need that. And then every time that changes, your answer changes.
Yes, because
mine doesn't.
It's based on the scale that I'm being
But see,
given.
that's my point, is mine doesn't change. Mine is universal.
It's not.
It is, because 2 out of 5, guess what? That's 4 out of 10. That's 20 out of 100. You could literally, that's the point of a fraction, is multiply it by whatever the scale is, and it fits. But yours needs to be reformulated for every stick.
But yours also would, again, equally have a issue with the fact that you cannot balance it on a geometric level.
If I had to make it physical, but it doesn't need to be physical.
It does.
No, because it's abstract.
Because in this case, with the 5-star system, it is being represented by a physical
Yes, but
line.
this is what my point is. You are so hung up on the freaking stars. I don't care what the stars are. My point is this film is more good than it is bad. I am measuring the film. I am not measuring the line or the stick or the stars. So it is the film.
But the problem is, how do you represent it's nothing?
As in, I feel nothing?
It is literally nothing. The film was not good or bad. It was just a film.
2.5. Because mathematically speaking, I could take 2.5 and say, okay, let's pretend it was a test with 100 questions. They got half of them right. They got the other half wrong. The film did some things okay. It did, in fact, so much okay and so much bad that they cancel each other out. That's what the film did. Mathematically speaking, I don't mean, there's no term for getting half on a test. It basically floated right in the middle of the test. It got half the questions right, half the questions wrong. And I can then say, guess what? Maybe it's a 50 question quest. 2.5 times, or 2.5. If I teach that as a fraction, 2.5 out of 5, that's 0.5, then okay, it's got 25 of the questions right. Or it got 5 of the questions right out of 10. This is why universal numbers are useful. Because I can say...
But at some level, you have to, if you're, again, on a physical representation level, the minute you bring physicality into it, you have to actually measure.
But there never needs to... But that's what's weird, is you're insisting that that is necessary. Like, once a physical things get introduced, but my point is, it's an abstract concept, there is no physical thing.
I'm only insisting it's necessary because that is already a predetermined factor to this discussion.
No.
What we are talking about is the 5-star system.
No, what we are talking about...
you and I measure it.
No, what we are actually talking about is the numerical system.
No, we weren't.
We are.
You're now changing that.
No.
This discussion, literally listed in our topics list, is discussing the 5-star system and how you and I define it and use it.
Okay, but no, let's get to... This is the point that's the name of what I called it, yes, sure. But the thing that we are discussing is how to numerically represent the quality of a film.
In the scale that's already been provided. Yes.
No, because the scale could be arbitrary, and my point
for you, yes. But I was talking about the 5-star system, which is what we were talking about.
Again, that means your system needs to be reevaluated every time a different scale is introduced.
I adapt my system based on the information I'm provided.
Yes, but I don't need to.
Sure.
Which means you could give me any old scale and mine will map onto it immediately, whereas yours requires a reimagining. I have to imagine, where's the new midpoint of this different scale? And now I have to find a different number to represent that. Whereas I could say, this is why fractions exist. This is why percentages matter. Because 50% of 100 is also 2.5 out of 5, or 5 out of 10, or 500 out of 1,000. That's why they represent, it literally cancels out the need for the scale. Because this will apply to every scale you could ever conceive of.
But until you bring an actual physicality
there needs to be no... This is what's weird, is you're insisting... But it won't work once a physical thing get introduced. Because maybe that's the case, but it's a film. There will never be a physical thing. If your
imaginary numbers actually do...
Well, they're not imaginary.
No, what I'm saying
is... Not by mathematical definition.
If your non-physical numbers actually are useful for measuring something that's doesn't matter the scale, then if somebody says to you, okay, so... what's your rating on this particular thing, and it's not a 5-star system anymore, you go, okay,
guess what? No, ask me that question. Give me a percentage. What is an average out of any percentage? Pick a scale. Because my answer is it will be 50% of the scale. That's why percentages matter. So you could say out of 17, and I'd go, okay, that's a weird one, but that would be 8.5. That's an average film out of 17. Because it's 50% of 17. I don't need to reevaluate. I just say, whatever it is, it's 50% of that. So if you're insisting that we have stars, but this is what's weird, is that you're constantly trying to redound to, once a physical thing gets introduced, it won't work anymore. But my point is, it's an abstract concept. There never will be a physical thing introduced.
The point is,
this is not how I would measure a building.
Have a scale in order.
No, you don't. This is my point.
If you don't have the 17,
it's 50%. Then is the answer, I guess. 50%.
The point is, if you don't have the scale, there's no way of actually saying this is what the film was like.
Except that 50% applies to every scale. That's the point. Whatever scale you imagine, it applies to all of them. This is why I'm confused, is because, yes, I would not measure a building this way because a film is not a building. This is where you're trying to say a film is equal to a building, and therefore
what I'm saying
you must use the same measurements.
That are given to us, to me, when we're talking about this discussion, happens to be a 5-star system.
But then guess what?
Which is represented by physicality.
Let's say if you wanted to migrate all of your stuff on Letterboxd and you say, I'm going to use this other service now, and they use a 10-star system. Well, now you've got to reevaluate every film based on the 10-star system. Whereas to me, I go,
no, I know. It's the same thing. I just put it in the midpoint.
Yes, but there's a new midpoint because there's a new scale. Now it's not a midpoint out of 5, it's a midpoint of something else. And so you would then have to pick your midpoint based on whatever your logic is. And I'm not denying that there's logic to it. It just seems it's far more complicated than it needs to be, because I could take all of my numbers. If I go from a 5 scale to a 10 scale system, great, multiply them by 2 and I'm done. Because guess what? It's 50%. Or it's not 50%. If it's a 3-star film, it's 60%. If it's a 3.5, it's 70%. If it's a 4-star, it's an 80% film. I can take everything and apply it to any new system, and it always works.
You don't disagree. Again,
unitless numbers matter.
But you used the system of, again, on a rating level when it comes to grades, you go a C is an average. Why? Because you have a B and then you have an A, grades. Or you have a D and an F.
Well, sure, but that's only with letter grades.
It's balanced.
And I'm not
the reason
using
that the C
I
is
said
the
from the
average
beginning
median
that I don't
because it's in the middle.
But I said from the beginning, I'm not using letter grades. I'm using percentages.
Saying I'm representing that within the 5-star system because it's what I've been given, and on a physical level,
yes, but why does it matter that that's what you've been given? Because mine doesn't matter.
Because that's, of course, what I'm going to work within.
But see,
why would I work within anything else if that's what I'm given?
Because you could also choose a different scale. You could choose.
Why?
Why not?
Because that's not what's provided.
Well, but see, that's what's weird is now you're relying on someone else to give you the scale to rate a film?
No, what I'm saying is if I'm going to use their services, then I must use the actual representation of what they're using.
Sure,
if I try
but then
to
guess
say,
what? If
I'm going to use my own
But if you want
system,
to use someone else's...
work.
But yeah, you're using their services. What happens when someone else offers you a service? You now have to reformulate your system for work in this new system. I don't have to do that. My system is universal.
Yes, you do, though.
No, it's universal.
It's not a 2.5 still. You still have to reevaluate your number in the same way I do.
Okay, no.
It's just different.
Because, again, you're seeming to forget the fact that in all of these, whenever we say 2.5, we are only saying 2.5 because it's out of 5, and that is implicit. We know that.
So the minute you change it to a 10, your number
No, because guess what? It's not two. So this is my point: is I don't say in every instance it's 2.5 out of 5 because that's more words than I need to convey. Because we're talking about out of 5.
Okay.
But if you take that as the implicit statement, then what I am saying is it is 2.5 divided by 5, which is always 0.5, 5 or 50%. So really, what I am saying in less precise terms is it's a 50% film. I guess I could say that if you really want me to. No, but generally the point of my system is it's so adaptable that I can adjust it to whatever someone says. I can say, this is precisely why computer code, this is how computer code works. Unitless numbers allow computer code to say, hey, all I have to keep track of is this one number. And then if I'm in this system, it's this. If I'm in this system, it's that. That's how compression works. We take all the variables, we cut out all the variables and go down to the unitless number. Dimensionless quantities, this is why they exist. And now I can say, oh, it's 5 out of 10, or it's 0.5. Technically, the mathematical evolution would be it's 0.5 times whatever the scale is. And therefore, the scale can be anything. It's 0.5 times 10, that's 5 out of 10. It's 0.5 times 5, it's 2.5 out of 10. 0.5 times 100, 50 out of 10. That's what I am saying when I say 2.5, because implicitly what I'm saying is 2.5 out of 5. If you would insist that I say that language every time, I suppose I can for your sake.
No, it's not even that. It's, again, I think trying to apply math
to an abstract concept, which is a film.
But
I understand your point if you're starting with physical things.
No, there are other things that are abstract that have been then applied to physicality that then have to be restricted to the physicality of it. This is where I was going to bring it back to Pythagoras. Again, I am based almost solely, on a mathematical level, very much geometric. Now, if there's a new term for it as far as metrology, great. But what I'm saying is my thought process in math only ever made sense to me when I was in the geometric field.
But here's the thing that throws me off.
Pythagoras literally tried to actually make a perfect system of music and ended up creating what's called the Wolf augment, which is a horrible, like, dissonant chord, because the fact that there's no way of actually dividing it in a way that's perfect. There's no way of actually breaking up the musical scale properly.
This is the thing that I think is so strange, is that you are constantly redounding to this notion that once you try to apply it to a physical thing, it will break down. Sure.
No, but I never will. Music isn't purely physical.
Okay, but we're not talking about rating a film. You can't deny there's nothing that you're saying that works with the musical concept, because you're saying it's the midpoint. Well, okay, that's not how you do music theory either. It's based on frequencies. It's based on hertz. And those things.
We had to try to get as close as possible thereabouts by saying this is middle C, and we're going to scale the system by eighths.
But see, no, it's only middle C on a grand piano.
I agree, but the point is,
so it's only the middle.
Isn't exact C it is an exact middle.
Exactly.
Because this the fact that it doesn't work when the mathematics and the actual physical get put into...
But see, this is my point.
So when abstract gets put into physical, it doesn't work.
Yes, but a film is never a physical object.
Until it's put into a 5-star linear system.
Which is not physical, because even that is conceptual.
It's not.
Even that, no one is going to say to you, literally, when you go to rate a film, no one's going, here's your scale, put the film on there. That's what I see. No, they're asking for a number.
But that's what I see.
Well, then you're going to have to acknowledge that you're seeing something that is not necessarily there.
It is there.
No.
Because it's been provided for me.
Okay, but fine. Take all this away. And I say, let's take all this away. And I say, I want you to give me a numerical value that equates to this film's value. What do you say? You say
that it doesn't mean anything because I can literally throw out any number ever, and if I don't have a scale, you just proved my point.
No, because the percentage...
If I don't have a scale, then I can't define it.
See, this is what's so strange is that...
Percentage I can, which I already conceded. Yes, I'm not using percentages.
But why not? Because there's your scale, and it goes with you everywhere. Nothing will ever change the percent scale.
So you can ask me why not, but that's the hang-up you have, is you're using percentages, I'm not.
Well, yes.
I'm using space.
But my point is, why use space for something that doesn't take up space? Because you're saying the space matters once I'm given the metric. But to me, I don't have to see it. I'm measuring the film.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, but see, that's where I'm...
Well, let me...
This is my point.
Let me ratify that statement.
You are using your system...
I enjoy seeing it.
Sure, but you are using your system to rate on the thing. Yes. I am skipping the thing and going straight to the movie. 50% movie. 50% of this film is good. The other 50% is not good. Which means half of the time in the theater, I'm going, oh, this is all right. The other half of the time, I'm going, no, this isn't very good. So when I leave the theater, I go, nah, it's just didn't do anything for me. Too much good or too much bad to balance the good. I just end up feeling kind of neutral. Black. Okay. If it's say, oh, maybe there was slightly more of good, not as much bad, I come out of the theater going, he was all right, not too bad. And then if it's a really great film, I go to the thing going, none of that was wasted. I feel like every second of my time was worth it. So I guess if you want...
I still can dictate that within the 3, 4, 5 system that I have.
Yes, but you are starting...
Average.
But you are starting arbitrarily.
A better than average movie, and then a great movie. But less than average movie, or a horrible movie.
You arrive at that after you set aside your little scale. You're starting with the scale and then applying that to the movie.
Someone else is giving me the scale.
Yeah, but I'm saying screw what the other person is saying. If no one else gave me the scale, I would still rate the films based on percentage, because then I don't need a scale. I was not reviewing films just because Letterboxd lets me. That's a
Sure.
convenient visual shorthand, yes. But
It's
that's not
visual
all.
shorthand to communicate to others. That's the key.
I suppose, but even then, I could also have this discussion with you, and I guess, again, I don't say it this way because this is not how people talk, but you would say 50% of the time in the film was fun, and the other 50% was boring. I'm not saying that because that takes way more time than saying it was 50%, or 2.5 out of 5, or 5 out of 10, or whatever it is. The point is, it's universal. I'm not rating a number on a thing. I'm rating my experience with the film.
A percentage is universal. I don't disagree.
And it can apply directly to the film without a mediator. You require the mediator of the metric. And then you apply the metric to the film. I'm going straight to the film and saying half of my experience, because again, experience is an abstract concept, but let's say, I mean, we'll take time because it's the most easy way to demonstrate it. Sure. But I say out of an hour-long film, I spent half an hour, not necessarily in one chunk, but of all the times of all the moments that I felt like, this is boring, it equaled half an hour. And then of all the moments in which I thought, this is kind of cool, it was half an hour. Obviously, this is such an abstract, no one talks about films this way. But I guess if you're going to drill me down until I have to, it's like, sure, this is what I'm saying. But of course, that's not why I don't say it that way, because I don't have to. But I guess my point is, what I am measuring is my experience of the film. I'm not taking this stick and then applying that to the film. I'm going straight to the film. And because dimensionless numbers, such as percentages, are dimensionless, I am able to do that and go straight to the thing in question without a mediator to get there. I don't need the stick to get the architect to the right building. I can essentially what I'm doing is just going, take the building, boom, that high. I can just make it. Because again, it's arbitrary. It's a non-real thing. I don't have to say it needs to be this many sticks. I can just say it needs to be this tall.
How do you define that?
I don't have to because it's no longer a physical thing. This is what you're hung up on is you keep saying, but when you need a physical thing, it won't work. But I'm saying I don't need a physical thing. It's a film. It's not a physical thing. This is my point is why use
numbers at all?
Well, no, because numbers are still abstract.
No, but my point is...
Percentages do not have units.
Sure. So is language, though, is my point. If you're seriously
I could say it's
physicality,
well,
you
I
could
suppose
just say
I could.
It's a great film, or it's okay, or it's not.
You could use that language, but it's less precise.
Not really.
Yeah. What's the difference between a good and a great? No one. I mean, that's kind of vague. Was it good or was it great?
It's a 2 or 3. I mean.
Well, no, because 51 is slightly more than 50. And I can't say, well, it was an average film with just a little tiny hint of okayness. Or, like, what's the difference between good and great? Numbers allow me more finitude, I guess, is the word. So I can say, you know what? And this is why I like it, is that I could say, okay, 2 films that I think are really great. I really liked the fourth John Wick film, and I really liked, but what didn't necessarily think it was great was I'm trying to think of a film that's been in like that recently. I don't know. Let's just pick some random thing. I see one film that I think is really good, the other film that I think is also really good, but actually just a little bit better. I could say what I just said, but that's less concise than saying
that is true.
This one was a 70 and this one was a 60. This one was more good than that. Now, the argument you could come down to a Zen thing and go, why do we need any of this language? Yeah.
Well, that's certainly
and I don't think... But again, here's my point. No. I could literally go through every film I've ever watched and give you a one sentence that says it was mostly good and it had some parts that were all right, but it did have one thing that was really bad, and so it kind of stuck slightly more positive. I could do that for every single film. Or, again, compression, thinking in computer terms, I can say, abstract out to one number, and I can just apply that number and go, this is the number. So now if I were to say to you, this film...
It's not a number, it's a percentage.
Well, no, a percentage is a number. You're thinking units.
But what I'm saying
a number is nothing. A number has no unit.
But what I'm saying is you have to concede that your system is solely based on percentage. It's not based on numbers.
Well, sure, I guess, but neither is yours.
That's true.
Yours is a number of sticks. Mine is a number of the thing.
Sure.
So, sure, but my point is, if I were to say, what did I think between these 2 films? Well, this one was really good. It had one part that made me think, it's not that good. and then the rest of it was sort of just okay. Do you know what I mean? And if I were to say, what about this other film? This film was also really good. It had a little bit of a spot that I thought was kind of weird, but mostly I thought it was pretty good. Can you tell me which of those two films I liked more based on that as not description?
No, obviously.
Exactly. Whereas if I say this one's a 60 and that one's a 70, you know. So this is why I agree.
This one's a 3 and this one's a 4. You could still say you know. I mean, it's like.
Well, yeah, but then the question is out of what? Because they could both still be really bad if that's out of 10. This one was really terrible, and I mean, if I had to pick, I'd rather watch this one, but I'd rather watch neither.
But again, then that's where the argument of changing falls apart, because
because mine adapts.
Yours adapts only for the person it saves the person who's doing the work time, but it doesn't specifically inherently guarantee that the other person's going to have any further understanding. If you say, what do you rate this film? I rate it 50%. Okay, so what's the actual...
I would pick a set of numbers because, again, any of them work.
If I'm using sticks, though, the point is, if I say...
Well, but again, this is where I go, I now have to adapt my system to your weird one. Whereas I could go to literally anyone and say, it was 5 out of 10. And most people would know, okay, that's 50%. Because I'm trusting that the average person knows enough math to know what a percentage is. That's like first grade.
I'm not saying that I don't know what a percentage is either. I'm just saying... then you have to adjust your number too. If you're talking about out of 10, obviously it's going to be 5.
Well, but then again, if someone were to ask me for
25.
But if someone were to ask me a rating and not give me out of a number, because you could come up to someone and say, "What do you think this was out of 10?" If a box office person came up to me right out of the theater, they'd say, "Out of 10, what'd you give that movie?" I would then say, out of 10, what they want. But if someone were to say, "What would you give that movie?" I could say 5 out of 10. I could say 2.5 out of this, I could say 50 out of 100. I could say any of those things because all those are the same thing. Mathematically speaking, 5 out of 10 is equal to 50 out of 100. Those are the exact same number. So I then get to pick the stick at that point, which means if someone hands me a stick, I can make my number work for their stick. But if they don't ask me the stick, I can also make it number because I can pick a stick out of thin air. Out of 144, it was a 77. I could be weird if they wanted me to. But I could also, generally you would just say, 5 out of 10, I guess.
I'm saying, I can easily do the same thing.
No, because you require the stick.
No.
No, if someone came up to you and said, what would you say this film was, you would have to give them this out of this. And you would require that for yourself. And if they came up to you and said, out of this, what would you give it? You'd have to reevaluate out of their stick. I don't need to reevaluate. The number plugs directly in. Because you would say to someone, I consider it a 3 out of 5, and that would be, you would give them the demonstration that is yours. And that's valid. That's valid. You can have yours. But what if they come up to you and says, out of this, what would you give it? You would then have to reevaluate based on the stick they just gave you. Whereas I don't have to do that. So this is my point. I have no clue why we're still talking about this. Because, we can agree that yours is physically spatial and mine is abstract. That seems to be the crux of it.
That is.
My point is, you keep trying to tell me that my abstract numbers aren't going to work when they're physical, but the point is, they never will be physical. Because it's an abstract concept, the quality of a film. And it's also subjective. We didn't even really touch on that.
There's no physical way of representing it at that point.
Well, I can pick any physical way. That's my point, is I could literally say, 1 thumbs up out of 2. That used to be the 90s thing. Oh, it's 2 thumbs up. It's just 1 thumbs up. Guess what? That's 50%. It's still the same number. So my point is, yes, how do you represent it? Because again, to say it's 2.5 out of 5, that's still abstract. That's not a physical thing. No one's going to give me a stick and say, break this stick on where you think this film was. That's what you're preparing for mentally. If someone said, break it on the stick, I could break it right in the midpoint, and that's what I think. And yes, but no one's ever going to do that to you. They're going to ask you, out of this number, what do you want? You could say, out of, this many things, how many of them? It's like, yes, that would work. They could hand you a thing and say, well, here's a measuring tape. I'm going to shorten it to here. There's your thing. And most people would think you were kind of weird. Whereas I can just go, out of this, it was this. Because again, it's not a physical object. It doesn't need to be determined in physical language. If that helps you to think about it, then sure. But don't go acting like I'm the one who's neglecting to think about its physical aspect, which it doesn't have.
I'm not saying it's you're neglecting the physical aspect of the movie. What I'm saying is to act as if the 5-star system is not an actual metric already provided is obtuse.
I'm not saying it is, but even the 5... But here's the thing. No one's giving me 5 stars and saying, break these into the appropriate amount to reflect the quality of the film.
That's exactly what they're
No, they're not, because ultimately the stars don't matter. It's 5 stars or 2.5 stars out of 5 stars. Thus the stars cancel out. I could just as easily say 2.5 circles out of 5 circles. That's still a number. It's not physical. Because when you say the midpoint, like, no one's coming up to you with, I mean, maybe, sure, but it's not, like, if someone came up to you with a physical thing, you're acting like they're going to come up to you with one of those thermometer scales from middle school when you're raising money. Go, fill this up to the point you thought it was good. In that case, sure, that makes sense, but most people don't talk like that. Even 5 stars, that's an abstract concept. The stars don't matter, it's 5. So out of 5, this number. It's the same thing as saying out of 10, because that's the thing. People don't necessarily say, out of 5 stars, what do you give it? They would just say, what would you give it out of 5? Out of 5 what? Who cares? Doesn't matter. You just apply the percentage. When you say physical, I actually mean like a literal object. Like you're saying it has to be out of this stick and I will break this stick right at the midpoint or slightly above the midpoint.
Sure.
Look, this was the good, this was the bad. There's slightly more good than bad. Yes, it makes sense.
Or on a scale.
Well, exactly, but no one's going to come up to you with a literal physical scale. Because even if they come up to you saying out of 5, they're still talking conceptually. They're not giving you 5 things that you then have to think and split them. They're saying out of a nebulous 5 somethings, it doesn't matter what they are. Like, numbers are abstract things. This is a physical object. It is 1 pen, but it can be broken into 3 separate parts.
Sure.
That only matters because this is a physical object. I could even break it further apart. I could break it into tiny pieces. But that's not what... This is precisely why numbers are valuable, because they don't require physical things. I could say 3, I could say 5. I'm not talking about...
But without the physical things, they're completely arbitrary.
Yes, but that's the whole point, is the whole thing is arbitrary. Your perception of a film is an arbitrary concept. So you get to pick out of what. If they provide you a thing, if someone came up to me and said, what would you rate out of 5? Well, I could say, oh, it's a 5 out of 10. Technically, I answered their question, but in a roundabout way, because the answer I gave is equally applicable to their system. But they're not giving me an object. They might be giving me a scale, and I could just as easily substitute their scale, because technically my thing applies to both scales. 5 out of 10 is 2.5 out of 5. They're the exact same number. Two different ways of saying the same thing. Whereas yours is only one way of doing a physical thing, because you're basing it off of a physical object. Well, there's that. I'm out of water and my throat hurts now. I didn't even get it. I was going to talk about the IMDb, my issue with that, and why I'll admit if you talk about travel, I skew towards the positive because I'd rather reflect nuance in the positive. I was going to get into a thing about the concept of gestalt and that there's no such thing as an inverse gestalt. There can be something that is better than the sum of its parts, but nothing has ever been described as less than the sum of its... Well, no, it's not even less than the sum, because the opposite of a sum would be negation. Like, if you took a bunch of bad pieces of a film, they wouldn't make a worse film than the bad pieces. Whereas if you took a bunch of great pieces and come together, not everyone, a lot of people would say they came together in such a good way that it's actually better than the individual pieces, but nothing's ever been worse than their individual pieces. At least I've never heard anyone describe that. Therefore...
Well, the conflicts of multiple terrible pieces are certainly worse than them individually.
Well, no, because I'm saying that when you take... I mean, this then becomes a sort of weird question about what do we mean when we say it's greater than the sum of its parts. But I'm saying a bad film that's just like badly written, badly acted, it's not worse than its individual parts. It's as bad as all of its individual parts are because they're all bad.
Well, who's deciding that? I think that it can...
Well, I'm saying my point is I've never heard anyone say that. Yes, theoretically someone could, but that's not in the common parlance. We don't have a word for that like we do with Gestalt.
Sure.
So my point is, if you were to take your 1 to 4, like I can start from 2.5, and I can go up 2 stars to 4.5, and I can go down 2 stars to 1 to half a star. And then The very few special select films that are greater than the sum of their parts get the 5, because that's where that extra star, half a star, comes from. If you want to talk about your travel distance, like it could either go 2.5 stars back, or I guess 2 stars down to half a star, or it could go 2 stars up to 4.5 stars, and that's internally consistent.
So you err on the side of positivity.
If I were to accept you're basing it off of travel, which I don't really, but I suppose if I had to, I would still defend it in this way, because I would rather leave there to be the possibility.
At that point, it's just a difference in what we're erring on, because I err on the side of negativity.
Which is odd, because why? Why do you want to be extra fine with how bad a film is?
Because I want to give nuance for the fact that there are some films that genuinely are horrible, and other films that are just like, it wasn't my favorite. That
means spending a lot of mental effort on something you didn't like, and I'd rather spend mental effort on things I did like.
That's certainly a good argument for
that. And again, I'm conceding this based on the travel metric, which is not my primary means.
I understand that. My issue, and again, the reason I brought Pythagoras into this is because when he tried to do that, where he applied mathematical precision to something that was abstract, it created chaos.
Well, but in theory, music, if you really want to get into it, it's not abstract. It is science. It is math.
And yet, it is abstract enough that he literally could not put it into the finite nature of math.
He was wrong, though, because nowadays we have the method. You can say...
No, you can't.
Yes, you could say a C is this many hertz.
But you cannot break it into perfect chunks. There's no way of breaking music into perfect chunks. There's no way of making a perfect scale.
Yeah, but because a scale is an arbitrary concept, whereas you could say this many hertz makes this note, this many hertz makes that note, and there is mathematical, like, the fact that I don't know. See, I don't know enough about the actual hertz of various notes, but it's like when you graph them as sine waves, like if you have an octave is... You have one sine wave that's this length.
Yes, correct.
The other sine wave is half.
That's literally what he was trying to do.
But he was wrong.
Work.
No,
he was not wrong.
He was wrong because if you take a sine equation, you can absolutely represent a note in a mathematical function. It's a sine wave.
Yes, exactly.
You could then say twice that sine wave.
Split that into correct or proper or even integers
because they don't
creating actually
exactly because he was trying integers.
No.
You have to. My point is, if you double a sine wave so that it completes the arc twice as fast,
right,
that's another octave.
It's not.
Yes, it is. You've been to the science center. You know how you say one. Gonna have to keep freaking drawing stuff on this paper that's got no space. This is your note. That's your sine wave. This is the octave above that note. That is mathematically accurate.
Okay.
The octave below that note is that. That is why you hear dissonance is when the sine waves don't match. There is a mathematical way to make them match.
And the point is there's no way of splitting those into equal parts.
But they don't have... This is my point, is they don't have to be equal parts. They can each be... It's not a matter of equal... Technically, this is the equal parts. Now, it's not 2 times 3 times 4... It's one sine wave in this length of time. That's what a hertz is. Twice that number of hertz is the octave. Because a hertz is a frequency over time. Time is part of a hertz. If you broke down... I used to know all these things because they made us, but a hertz is 1 over a second. Meaning 1 completion versus a second. Over a second, rather. 2 completions over a second is an octave. It's twice.
But my point is, as you continue to parse that out, on an abstract level, the music actually becomes not pleasant.
See, Pythagoras was just... But see, this is where I go...
You're trying to apply a perfect metric in...
But Pythagoras was wrong because he was in an age when he didn't have the ability to measure hertz. We can now measure hertz and thus can do exactly that.
No, he was doing this exact thing.
Except he had no concept of hertz.
No,
there was no means of measuring a hertz.
There's no way of placing that in
It's with hertz.
No.
Okay. 440 is twice 220. Those are the octaves.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure it's the accurate number.
My point is that there's no way of placing that equally in space.
Because it's not... This is my point. It's non-spatial. 2 times a hertz, whatever the hertz value is, if you took I don't know what middle C is, but like 220 is one of the notes. I don't know which one. 440 is the octave of that note.
And when you place it on this piano, it's not in middle.
Because we're not talking about the middle, we're talking about twice the hertz.
Yes,
the piano doesn't determine sound. Hertz
it does.
No, hertz determines sound.
But my point is, that's what creates it. When you create a musical instrument, it's all going to create sound in the same manner that a C is going to always be represented by this particular sound in hertz. Always.
Well, yes, the piano is
as
tuned.
you
But no, here's the thing.
build...
You're acting like the piano comes first. They tune the piano to the hertz.
I'm not suggesting a piano comes first. What I'm saying is no matter what musical instruments you use, there's no way of equally spacing or dividing...
Because it's logarithmic, I believe, is why.
...a scale.
Okay, logarithmic scales are not equal, but they are still considered scales.
Sure, but they're not equal.
But again, you're insisting on the spatial where it doesn't fit. My point is that it doesn't require spatial. 2 times a hertz will give you the octave. It doesn't matter where that is on the piano. It's not going to be halfway through because we're not talking about the piano in the same way that I'm not talking about the 5 stars. I'm talking about the thing that the stars represent. So skip the stars and go straight to it. Like I'm going to look this up just to be double hertz octave. I don't think this is the correct language to speak about it. Logarithmic unit for ratios between frequencies with 1 octave corresponding to doubling of frequency. It's a logarithmic scale. Logarithmic scales are weird because they are not spatially equal. It's actually the same way that decibels work. 2 decibels, isn't it like 3 decibels is twice the volume? Which means 6 decibels is 4 times the volume. It's exponential. So, yeah, logarithmic scales. Let me pull it up. Now it's not loading. But the point is, it doesn't have to be spatial. It is mathematically spatial, though. Not mathematically spatial. It is consistent within mathematics. So 3 times a hertz value will give you 2 octaves above the original hertz. In the same sense that 2 or 3 decibels above one value is twice that value. It's not spatially consistent because it's exponential.
Look up, but when you try to then add...
You don't add, you multiply.
No,
that's the difference.
When you try to say, okay, don't take more than just strictly the octaves. Actually split that out into, okay, what is
well, a fifth isn't. I think a fifth is like it's 2/3 of a sine wave or something. So
you go.
They're slightly together,
within
but not
an actual
fully.
chromatic scale. It does not allow you to equally move from note to note, in that the way that it's spaced is not. Look up how Pythagoras described it. Because basically, what he was trying to do.
I don't care how he did it because he was wrong.
No, what
this
he,
is
what
the
he
modern
found
definition.
was that it literally does not fit into the context of.
But he was
look
wrong.
It up.
Okay, but my point is, we have technology he didn't have, which is why our math is correct.
I'm wanting to.
Well, because this is going to be like a Wikipedia rabbit trail, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Pythagoras music theory, like what? This is going to lead. I don't have the time to go through all of this. Because this is going to require like actual reading of several paragraphs worth of stuff, whereas mine was literally an octave is when you double the hertz of something.
I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is, as you try to actually apply exact mathematics to music, it ends up creating massive dissonance because the fact that it doesn't work.
You are wrong.
No,
because if you double the hertz, you get an octave. That's math applied to music.
Yes, and that's only talking about octaves.
Okay, but see that, but there is, okay, I'll look up what the multiplication is of a perfect fifth. Perfect fifth hertz. Because it's probably something like 2/3 times the original value. This is why percentages mean something, because you can take the number, multiply it by something else, and it will work. Ratio of 2 to 3. So a perfect fifth.
Then continue that, and it doesn't work.
No, it will.
No.
Yes, it will. That's the definition. That is the definition of a ratio. A ratio goes on. 3 to 2 is also 6 to 4, is also 8 to 6.
Continue that on the piano, and I promise you.
Well, no,
you'll
it doesn't.
get a
It's not.
pleasant sound.
It's not spatial, as in it's always the same number of.
I'm not saying that.
keys.
I'm saying you go 1 to 5 to then the next 1, the next 5, or whatever else. It's not going to sound correct.
Well, because at that point, no, because it's always 3 to 2 to the not the original to the previous. So if I take a note and I play the perfect fifth, that means that this is 2, this is 3. It's a ratio, 3 to 2. If I go the next one up, I will be in perfect sync with this one, but not with the original.
Not with that one.
Yes, because it's based on the
But that's my
previous, not the
point.
current. No,
So you hold them all, and it's not going to sound
okay,
good.
but that's not what mathematically speaking. That's no longer what you're doing, because something that is 2/3 of this cannot also be 2/3 of something else.
I'm not saying that it's supposed to be 2/3.
Well, you're acting like if I do 1/5 and then another fifth, they should all be fifths. No, it will 1/5 from the original. It would be 1/10 from the first, which is slightly less than an octave, which would be somewhat dissonant. But it will be a perfect fifth from the previous, in the same sense that 3 decibels is twice the volume of something of something that's 0 decibels. So I guess 0 decibels is nothing, but an increase of 3 decibels is twice the previous value. 3 more decibels is twice that, not twice the first. This is why logarithmic scales are kind of weird. If in fact, I'll show you the way a logarithmic scale is mathematically depicted, because it is weird. But you start like this. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it starts over. You know, this is now it's 10, 20, 30, something like this. So yes, you're correct in that it is not spatially accurate, but that's because it is not multiplication. It's not 2x, 3x. It's log 3, log 4, and log is a weird function. These are mathematically correct scales. They are not spatially correct scales. So you can't do that on something like a piano, because the piano is physically spaced. This is precisely my point, is that it's all about the function. This is why percentages and mathematical functions are valuable, because they can apply to more than physical scenarios. If you're stuck with just the physical,
mathematics are only useful when you deal with the physicality.
well, then you're quite incorrect about that, because plenty of engineering is entirely hypothetical. There is no such thing as a derivative physically. There are things physically that are derivatives of other things, but that is not. We don't base the derivative off of the physical things. It's like the Fibonacci sequence. There are things in nature that match the Fibonacci sequence, but the Fibonacci sequence is not a natural thing. It's an abstract thing that nature occasionally references.
Not occasionally, quite a bit.
Well, sure, but I'm saying not everything is the Fibonacci sequence in nature.
Well,
and the Fibonacci sequence did not arise from nature. In the same way that a derivative, there are physical things that can be described by derivatives, but there are also plenty of of derivatives that don't have any physical thing. And to say that they are useless would be inaccurate, because you still need them to do mathematical calculation. Math does not have to exist in the world to be correct. This is the crux of math. My sinuses.
Well, what is its use then?
I'm going to have to break this up. This can't all go out at once when an hour of this has been this green.
Whatever.
The point is, spatially speaking, math does not always fit nicely in space. This is precisely why I would choose to skip space when possible. Because math won't always fit it very well, because math is abstract and space is physical. Sometimes they line up very nicely, sometimes they don't. So,
but when they don't,
I would err on the abstract, because math is universal. Just because it doesn't apply to this one's physics. Because again, the logarithmic scale is not.
Because again, even on an engineering level, you have to then bring it back to the physical at some level.
No, not necessarily. A lot of things are purely this math would govern a hypothetical situation.
Why do it? If you're supposed to be engineering something,
you're not always. Sometimes because this is, what's crazy about something like, why do imaginary numbers exist? Because on their own, they can't represent anything. That's why they're imaginary numbers. But the reason why we have to represent them mathematically is because it is possible when you take something like, if you multiply, I don't know what the proper thing is. I don't think it's multiplication. But you could perform a mathematical calculation that would give you an imaginary number, which means that the answer to this problem has no physical existence.
Only because of the infinite the finite
If you were
nature of it.
No, that means this number does not exist anywhere, and therefore the solution to this cannot exist. Because this number has no physical manifestation. Nothing can be represented in nature by this number. But if you're in the middle of a complex, like calculus question, you might get an imaginary number as part of this solution and an imaginary number as part of this solution, which means on their own they're useless. When multiplied by each other, or I don't know if it's multiplication, but something you can do to an imaginary number will put it back to a real number. Which means, yes, it has no use on its own, but it still needs to be a thing that exists, not zero. Why does zero exist? Zero only exists as a number so that complex mathematics can exist. Because there is nothing that can be represented by zero, but zero is useful because it can be used in conjunction with other things to make real things. In the same way that imaginary numbers can't do anything on their own, but we need some kind of representation for them, because if you find an impossible situation here and an impossible situation here, sometimes they are mutually impossible such that their combination makes something possible, which is totally weird, but that's math for you. It's a little bit like quantum mechanics, where you just go, okay, it's both are wrong, and because both are wrong, the solution is correct. Like, it's weird, but that is how it works. And we don't fully even understand it. But you have to have a representation for something that doesn't exist, because otherwise you can't. It can be a stepping stone towards something that does exist down the line. You might be able to realify an imaginary number in non-mathematical terms. This is going to have to be broken up. I might break it up after the Xbox turns off. Because even then, these would both be very long.
That's fine. Either way, I don't disagree that my scale certainly requires that there's actually explanation provided. Only in that I think mine makes sense if somebody were to look at it. It doesn't make sense.
Even then, it would only work if
it doesn't make sense if someone were to hear me explain it.
Well, no, I would disagree. I would say it would only make sense if someone heard you explain it.
If someone was looking at it, and I'm rating a film, and I put it here, that makes sense.
Sure, in the same sense that, like, if someone asked you what you thought of a film and you got out a scale and perfectly balanced it, they might intuit that what you mean is it was equally good and equally bad, but that's not the way most people would think of it. You would have to explain to them what exactly you were meaning to communicate. Whereas I feel like my system is explainable without, or rather, does not require the explanation. People would see it and go, oh, I get it. Because, again, it's universal. So they might say, take 50%, and they might be thinking out of 10, and I'm thinking out of 5, but we both are talking about the same number. Because 50% of 5 is also 50% of 10.
Sure.
Or rather, I suppose 2.5 out of 5 is equal to 5 out of 10, because they are both 50%.
But I could equally represent that by simply saying the midpoint.
Well, yeah, sure. You could say midpoint. If someone asked you what you think of the film, I was kind of in the middle. I mean, people say that. Yeah, I was sort of in the middle, so-so. Again, your example with language is perfectly valid, because you could give someone a language-based explanation.
Well, no, because the midpoint is a mathematical term. Again, it's not...
Well, no, it's a geographical term.
No, it's also...
It's a geographical term.
But it's also a mathematical term.
There is no midpoint of a number.
That is... Okay.
No, you're talking... No, what's the midpoint of 5? No. What's the midpoint between 0 and 5? Yes.
Yes, but my point is, that is a mathematical concept. In the same way median is.
Yes, but it's not... But midpoint requires... You can't have the midpoint of a number. You have to have the midpoint of a span between two numbers.
Median, if you prefer
which is
that term.
No, you can't have a median of a number. You have to have a medium of a of a spectrum. What's the median of 10 to 20?
But that's my point.
But again, yours requires...
Yeah,
but yours requires the median of what? What's the midpoint of what? Mine does not require that. Now, you could logically, within language, say, what is it? I was kind of in the middle. People would know what you meant.
Median, again.
Because again, it's not the correct use of the word median. If you said it was in the middle, people would know what you meant. If you said, pretty good, better than average, again, you could refer to these things in non-mathematical language and still have people get what you mean. My point is that the mathematical language, A, allows you more nuance, B, is more precise across all films. Because if I say, oh, that film was good, oh, and that film was good too, well, which film do I think is better? I would have to then break down like, well, this one was kind of good, but this one was really good. And then, what if two films are really good? Well, this one was like really good. It's like, yes, am I getting my point across? Sure, but it's not very precise. So my point is aiming for precision and no
By
visual
using
interpretation.
Specifically, percentage.
Sure, because I think that applies to any scale you could apply it to, and it also allows more nuance because percentages can be. I mean, I could get real fine and go, it was a 53.7. I mean, I'm not going to get that specific, but I could. Anyways, I do not know what I'm going to do with this because I never could have possibly guessed that this would. This was how this was going to go. But anyway.
There you go.
I am busting for a wee.
Apparently, I demand too much of space.
It's not that you demand too much of space. You just seem to have a bizarre obsession with space. And again, I mean, that's sort of a left brain, right brain. You know, there's multiple. That's sort of a personality-based thing. Do you think in details or do you think in broad pictures? I mean, there are people who think spatially and there are people who think abstractly. That's part of that breakdown. Anyways.
There you go. That's what it comes down to.
I feel like we need to end with some sort of fanfare or something like.
No, it's fine.
No, it's alright.
We'll end with everybody saying, yeah. That was a weird one.